If you're stuck somewhere between 60 to 70% in exams, I want you to think about your last test for a second. Did you run out of time? Did you lose marks even though you knew the content? Or did some questions feel completely unfamiliar? Because when students get stuck around 65%, it almost never means they're lazy. Most of the time, you've actually been studying a lot, but you've hit a plateau. And in almost every case, that plateau is caused by one of 4 hidden problems. The tricky part is this. Most students misdiagnose which one they actually have. They assume they just need to revise more, but revising more doesn't fix the real issue. So in this video, I'm going to break down the 4 reasons students get stuck around 60 to 70% with tactical examples and tips on how to fix each of them. And by the end, you'll know exactly which one is holding you back. But before we start, try to guess. Which one of these do you think is your issue? Is it you don't know enough of the content, you don't fully understand the content, your exam technique is weak, or your performance drops under exam pressure? Pick one in your head and hold on to it, because there's a good chance you're guessing wrong. The plateau. Most students think that if they just study more, their marks will eventually increase. But that's not what usually happens. Instead, something like this happens. The more effort and time you put into revision, the faster the line on your exam score rises, until it doesn't. You find yourself stuck at around 65%. Students keep putting in more hours, more revision, more notes, but the marks barely move. And that's because plateaus usually mean you're solving the wrong problem. You're pulling harder on the same lever when the real improvement comes from pulling the right lever. And that's what these 4 problems reveal. Problem 1 is knowledge gaps. The first reason students get stuck around 65% is the most obvious. They simply don't know parts of the content. This happens constantly in math and science subjects. Students revise the topics that they already feel comfortable with, but they quietly avoid the ones that they find confusing. And when these topics appear in the exam, well, suddenly you've lost 10 to 15 marks just like that. If the same topics keep costing you marks across multiple papers, that's not an exam technique problem. That's a coverage problem. You've never fully closed that knowledge gap. The solution here is targeted revision. Not rereading notes, not watching lectures again, but forcing your brain to retrieve information. This is where methods like active recall or blurting are gold. For example, blurting works like this. You close your notes and try to write down everything you remember about a topic. Then you compare it to your notes and fill the gaps. That retrieval process is what actually strengthens memory. But here's the interesting thing. Most students think that this is their main problem. They assume they just need to memorize more. But in reality, a lot of students stuck at 65% actually know the content already. Their problem is something deeper. Problem 2 is weak understanding. Some students know the formulas, they've memorized the definitions, they've reviewed lecture notes, but when the exam question changes slightly, everything falls apart. This happens because they memorized information without truly understanding it. And math and science exams are designed to expose that. You might memorize a formula perfectly, but when the question combines 2 ideas together, suddenly it becomes confusing. Because memorization creates rigid knowledge, but understanding creates flexible knowledge. Top students constantly ask questions like, why does this formula work? What assumptions are being made here? How does this concept connect to other topics? Because once you understand something deeply, unfamiliar questions stop feeling so unfamiliar. One powerful technique here is the Feynman method. Try explaining the concept out loud as if you're teaching someone else. If you can't explain it simply, you probably don't understand it fully yet. But even students who understand the content often stay stuck around 65%, and the reason for that usually has nothing to do with knowledge at all. Problem 3 is exam technique. Many students assume exams measure how much you know. But in reality, exams often measure how well you match the mark scheme. You might understand the concept perfectly, but still lose marks. For example, a question might ask you to explain something, but you describe it. Or the mark scheme requires a specific terminology, but the student uses informal terminology. These small things add up. 5 marks lost here, 3 marks lost there, and suddenly your score drops from 80 to 65. This happens more often than you think. I tutored a student who kept getting around 68% in math exams. They assumed the problem was content, so they revised more notes, more videos, more flashcards, but their scores barely moved. So we looked through their past papers together, and the real issue turned out to be something a lot simpler. They were skipping intermediate steps in calculations that the mark scheme was actually awarding marks for those steps, but they were not writing those steps down. And once they fixed that one habit, their score jumped into the mid-80s. Same knowledge, same ability, just better alignment with the mark scheme now. And that's why exam technique can cost students 10 to 15% of their marks. The only way to fix this is through past paper practice, but not random practice. You need what I call past paper loops. Attempt a paper, then analyze and categorize every mistake you made. Was it knowledge, understanding, or exam technique? Then fix the issue before doing the next paper. That's the most important part. This leads to an even bigger difference between average students and the top students. At this point, most students think the solution is simple. They just need to study more. But exam performance is not controlled by just one thing. It's controlled by a system, the 4-lever system. Most students keep pulling the same lever. They study more. But if the real problem is exam technique or understanding or exam pressure, pulling the knowledge lever harder won't fix it, so their score is not going to move. Top students approach this differently. Instead of pulling harder, they figure out which lever actually controls their marks, and that leads to a completely different revision strategy. Average students revise like this. They study the content, they test themselves, and then they repeat. But top students reverse the process. Their loops look like this. They start off by testing themselves, then they diagnose their errors. They fix them by studying, and then they retest. Do you see the key difference here? The test isn't the end of revision for them. It's the start of it. And that leads to the final reason students stay stuck at around 65%. Problem number 4 is performance under pressure. Say you've revised well. You understand the content, you performed well during practice, but when the real exam arrives, your performance drops. This usually happens for 2 reasons. The first is time pressure. Students who don't practice full papers under time conditions often run out of time in the real exam. The second is cognitive overload. During an exam, your brain is juggling multiple tasks: reading questions, recalling information, solving problems, managing time. If these processes aren't automated through practice by the time your real exams come around, your brain simply runs out of capacity. That's why top students regularly simulate real exam conditions during revision in their exam season. They do timed papers in a silent environment with no notes. They're training their brain to perform under the exact same conditions as the real exam, so there are no surprises. So here is the $1,000,000 question. Which of these 4 problems is actually holding you back? Here's a quick way to diagnose it. If you consistently lose marks on the same topics, your issue is probably knowledge gaps. If unfamiliar questions confuse you even when you know the content, it's likely weak understanding. If you look at this mark scheme and you think, I basically wrote that, but you still lost marks, then it's probably exam technique. And if your practice scores are higher than your real exam result, then your issue is performance under pressure. Once you identify the real bottleneck, improvement becomes much easier. Because instead of just studying more, you start fixing the exact thing that's costing you marks. So to recap, most students stuck around 60 to 70% aren't stuck because they aren't working hard enough. They're stuck because of one of the following 4 bottlenecks: knowledge gaps, weak conceptual understanding, poor exam technique, performance under exam pressure. Once you identify which one applies to you, you can improve much faster. So here's something I want you to do. Take your last 2 or 3 past papers and analyze every single mistake. Ask yourself, was this a knowledge issue, an understanding issue, an exam technique mistake, or an exam performance issue? Because once you diagnose the real problem, breaking past 65% becomes much easier. And if you want to know how writing notes is killing your grades, watch this video that tells you why and what to do instead. Until next time.